pleasure to introduce our lunch speaker today, Jim Muncy, who is a founder of the Space Frontier Foundation and also of PoliSpace. His distinguished career in Washington, D.C. includes the passage of the Commercial Space Act in 2004, which he helped usher in to ensure that our industry could compete and develop. And he will be addressing today the fact that settlement is a verb. As a non-English major, I'm not sure if that is in fact the case, but hopefully he will clarify that for us. So please join me in welcoming Jim Muncy to the stage.
So I definitely wasn't an English major, and of course it's not a verb. But, I mean, it isn't a good way to sort of get us thinking about something. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a space policy consultant in Washington, D.C. And along with Mr. Tomlinson and Mr. Verb and some other people, I helped co-found this organization 23 years ago, and God, I feel old. Especially by all the young people here, which is great, but you know, it just makes me feel even older. My remarks today are prompted by a speech that many of you either saw in person or hopefully have seen on the web that my friend and client and another Space Frontier Foundation advocate, Jeff Grayson from X-Corps, gave at ISDC this year in Huntsville. And also a discussion, panel discussion that Jim Dunstan and I were on in Washington about a month ago that saved off of some of the things that Jeff said at a space law conference in Washington. And you know, it's this idea of settlement as the ultimate goal for human spaceflight and for exploration and for our space program. Over the past several years, starting in 2003, 2004, there's been a growing awareness. I would call it sort of like flickering flames, not a raging fire or anything. Growing awareness that the real reason, you know, as Mike Griffin would say, or the ultimate goal, or the real raison d'etre for human spaceflight is not just human spaceflight in and of itself, but human spaceflight with an idea towards that we're actually going to go live there someday. And therefore, the settlement of the solar system and moving out beyond that, that is the natural activity that what we do as humans flying into space today is part of. And if you look at the Columbia Accident Investigation Board report, talking about, you know, we have to be doing something more substantial than just flying in circle, just operating, just doing limited things. You know, President Bush's exploration policy talked about it. Even better, President Bush's science advisor talked about expanding Earth's economic sphere into the solar system. During the Augustine Committee's deliberations, that of course Jeff was a member of, you know, they all sort of, you know, were wrestling at the beginning of the process, you know, with, okay, well, why do we have a human spaceflight program anyways? And all of these people, only one of whom was a Space Frontier Foundation advocate, you know, basically said one version or another of, because we're going to go live there, okay? These are fairly, you know, academics and scientists and fairly what I might call establishment industry figures. And they all had the dream, okay? And, you know, the thesis of Jeff's speech was, let's admit it, okay? And, you know, this is not even a new thing. I mean, this has come, you know, before. 15, 16 years ago, I was the White House staff liaison to the National Commission on Space. Most people don't remember it. Those who remember or have read about it sometimes call it the Payne Commission because former NASA Administrator Tom Payne was the chairman. It was back in 1985 and 1986, and Gerard O'Neill, the author of The High Frontier and the sort of the intellectual godfather of our community and of this organization, was on that commission, and, we had a sort of a 30-word, 40-word sort of vision statement that was the apex of the report, and we had a big fight over whether or not that statement should include the word settlement or not. And there was a very famous professor of aeronautics and astronautics from a northeastern technical university who was arguing against it. And there was concern, this makes us sound loony, this is too radical, this is too far out, we can't be talking about these things. And Jerry and I argued and said, wait a second, okay, you guys you're advising the president, you're not working for the Congress or NASA, or the space community. You are advising the President of the United States, okay? The President of the United States apparently seems to agree with your arguments that you've made with him that space is a frontier. Okay, well, it's either a frontier or it's not. Frontiers have settlements. And after that, we made that argument, Tom Paine came back and echoed that argument, and we beat the guy from MIT and won the argument, and it went in the word settlement in the report. So this is not a new idea that the reason humans are going is to go, to be there. Not just as a stunt, but as an ongoing, enduring, self-sufficient activity. Now, as I say, it's not new, but it's also not necessarily widespread. There's no consensus of this. I mean, a lot of important people, including recently the President of the United States, talked about, indefinite stays, indefinite presence of humans in the solar system, okay? That's pretty good for the President of the United States to talk about space settlement. But there's no consensus. I would argue perhaps that the senators who were involved in drafting the NASA authorization bill last year probably didn't have space settlement at the forefront of their mind in crafting, well, I'll just leave it at that. I think you know what I mean. But we tend to talk about space settlement to the extent that we do, as when we're talking about it as the goal, as an ultimate goal, as a long-term thing, as where we're going eventually. Okay, and we create pretty pictures in our mind about it. What it will look like, and we have the O'Neill colonies or Heinlein stories about humans living out in the solar system or moving out and spreading out across the galaxy. And of course, these motivate us and inspire us and energize us. And this is great. But I would argue there's something missing from the conversation if it's just seen as this sort of long-term thing. Because really the question is how does the goal of settlement relate to what we're doing today? And vice versa, how does what we're doing today relate to settlement? Because if that is the ultimate goal, presumably what we should be doing should be in line with that. It should be building towards that. It should be helping to achieve that, okay? I mean, a strategic goal is not just a fantasy or a pipe dream. A strategic goal is supposed to inspire and guide our actions every day. So the problem then with space settlement and the way we think of it, is that it's sort of out there. It's a noun. It's a thing that we'll have someday. It will be a space settlement or a space colony or space colonies or buildings or infrastructure or something, okay? As opposed to thinking of it, I would argue, as a verb, as a process, as the act of settling. What humans do is we find a new place and we look around and we see if there's any stuff that we can use that would be useful. And if a place looks like it would support us, and there's useful stuff around, and then we say, oh, we can live here. And maybe we help set our kids up there. Or they move on and take over. That's how we settle. That's what we do. That's how civilization expands and grows and is dynamic. That's what civilization really is. The civilizing of a place where there is no life, bringing life to it. So in that context, space settlement isn't what we want to get to someday. It's hopefully what we're doing now, or not doing now. We either are or we aren't, or maybe it's a gradation, but it's in the present. It's a verb. It's an action. It's something that's going on or not going on to some extent in the present. And that gives us a way to evaluate what we're doing. Or what someone else is proposing, what some congressman is offering, saying we should do, or some company is proposing. How is this not going to lead to space settlement someday? How is this either settling space or not settling space? Now, in the near term, literally in the present. When we think of settlement as this ultimate goal, what we do, I've been in these discussions with people say, well, if I do X and I can make X work, and then if I do Y and I can do Y works, and then if we do Z, and then if several miracles occur, we'll get colonies in space. Not very powerful. No real, access to making sure you're going to get there. Settlement as a verb says X. That first thing either does or doesn't fit with the process of settling space. It either advances it or it doesn't. Well, that doesn't mean you don't have to do things that aren't part of settling space. But then you can say, okay, well, 70% of my time today was settling space, or 50% of the NASA budget is settling space, or 30% of what my NASA research center is doing is settling space. I wish it were more, but that's what I can do right now. But at least then at least you're conscious, at least you're awake, at least you know what's going on. Are you getting there to where we all want to go? Now, as an example, we have the International Space Station, our national laboratory in space, according to the Congress. Some people think of it as a government building in low Earth orbit. But as Lori said, it's actually a settlement. It's actually a human settlement. The Foundation talked about it years ago as Alpha Town. We got heat from that, from our libertarian friends, who said, no, it's evil, it's wrong, it's inefficient. Okay. So, it's happening. Do we let it be just a government building, or do we turn it into a settlement? Do we insist that it be thought of as a settlement? And our argument was, we want it to be a settlement. It may be a lousy settlement. But if we can make it a settlement, if we can argue for it being a settlement and treat it as a settlement and thought of as a settlement, and then policies and programs developed for it as a settlement, that moves the process of settling forward. So, let's take a non-controversial NASA project related to the ISS. I think it's called Commercial Crew, I'm not sure. I'm not that conversant with it, really. Is Commercial Crew about trying to more efficiently than Orion and SLS, develop a system to launch astronauts to low Earth orbit and bring them back so that they can get to and from the ISS other than on the Soyuz. Is that what commercial crew is about? There are some people who absolutely believe that it's just another way of acquiring a system that NASA can use or buy for NASA to go to the space station. Or is it part of a transportation policy that creates a high bandwidth transportation industry that opens up and allows the growth, the rapid growth of this first space settlement from a town into a city? Now, in that context, using FAR-based contracts to develop commercial crew systems isn't inefficient, it isn't counterproductive, it's idiotic. Context is everything. And it's our job to apply our ideology and our vision in our context. Do we really expect senators to do it for us? Do we really expect that our leaders who may not share those views, and after all, they're in charge, they're not producing the result right now, we have to apply it. We have to argue for that way of thinking about space, way of thinking about the space station, way of thinking about commercial crew. Brian Young, the Secretary of the Foundation. Brian, where are you? Stand up. He's not here. Okay. Is the Secretary of the Board of the Space Frontier Foundation, and one of our young leaders, and an incredible guy. He works at JPL. He gave a little speech last night at our advocates meeting, and almost apologetically said that he works at JPL and with unmanned space. But then he went on to explain how the Grail mission that he's been working on is actually going to go demonstrate new means of navigating and charting ways of getting to and around the moon and libration points that will be used by things like propellant depots and settlers and things like that. He's settling space and he's using robots to do it. How cool is that? We're using the science budget to do settlement. That's great. So my request is that you go back into your job, into your advocacy activities, in your avocation and your life, and ask yourself if what you're doing, if what people around you are doing, are consistent with settlement as a verb in the present, as a daily process of moving humanity into space. If you do that, what I promise you, and by the way, it may not be pleasant. It's like holding up a mirror is not always a great idea. Actually asking, is this getting us where we want to go, isn't always pleasant. But if you do that, we will all get there that much sooner. We will get that much more inclusively and broadly, and we will get there that much more assuredly. And we will, in fact, inherit the stars. Thank you very much.